During the Iran-Iraq War between 1980 and 1988, China provided significant military support to Iran. Iran back then was facing a weapons embargo imposed by Western countries led by the United States. China was one of the few countries that continued to provide military assistance to Iran during this conflict. China's decision to support Iran during the war was driven by a couple of factors. First, China and Iran had a long-standing economic and diplomatic ties. China was interested in maintaining its strategic relationship with Tehran. Second, China saw an opportunity to expand its influence in the Middle East by providing support to Iran, which was then emerging as a regional power. Also, China viewed the Iran-Iraq war as an opportunity to undermine the influence of the United States and its allies in the region. China provided Iran with a range of military hardware, including anti-ship missiles, surface-to-surface missiles, tanks, as well as other military equipment. China's assistance was critical to Iran's ability to resist Iraq's military aggression and ultimately emerge victorious in that war. Cut to today, 40 years later, China and Iran have a comprehensive strategic partnership. Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi was in Beijing this week, one of the first heads of state to visit China since it opened up after the easing of COVID restrictions. The relationship between Tehran and Beijing has taken on renewed importance in recent years because of a combination of factors, including the US withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal and China's growing global ambitions. Iran sees China as a reliable partner that can help it weather economic sanctions as well as reduce its dependence on the West. China, on the other hand, sees Iran as a key strategic partner that can help it gain greater access to the Middle East. How is this increasing Chinese diplomacy with the Middle East being viewed by Washington? On CRUX DECODE, can China balance both Iran and competing Arab powers like Saudi Arabia? With Washington's own ties with traditional ally Saudi Arabia in a rather fraught state, can China step in to fill the void? And are smaller but powerful Middle Eastern countries like Iran and Saudi Arabia just simply playing China off America? There have been several turning points in the Iran-China bilateral relationship in the last few years. It started with the 2015 Iran nuclear deal. This agreement paved the way for greater economic ties between Iran and China as it lifted some of the sanctions that had been imposed on Iran. China was also party to the negotiations and played a key role in brokering the deal. But then things got a real fillip when the United States withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 under then-President Donald Trump. This led to renewed interest in the Iran-China relationship. Iran sought to strengthen its ties with Beijing in the face of American sanctions. Joe Biden, since assuming office a couple of years ago, he's been trying to revive this deal, but not with much success. And the biggest, of course, was the 25-year strategic partnership between Tehran and Beijing that was signed in 2021. The agreement outlines a comprehensive roadmap for cooperation between Iran and China. It's on a host of areas like energy, infrastructure, and defense. It is seen as a significant milestone in the relationship between both countries. In fact, it is $400 billion worth and a 25-year economic partnership, which includes energy cooperation as one of its pillars. China has agreed to increase its import of Iranian oil and gas, which will of course help Iran reduce its dependence on the West. Iran does not officially publish statistics about its oil sales, but analysts say over the last 3 months, Tehran has increased its oil exports to more than 1.2 million barrels per day, and much of that oil is being purchased by China. Iranian oil has found its way around the sanctions regime. It's not just on energy import, infrastructure development. China says it's going to invest as well as help Iran's infrastructure, including its transportation networks, ports and airports, and telecommunication systems. And most importantly, in trade and investment, China and Iran, according to this 2021 agreement, have agreed to increase their bilateral trade and investment with a focus on agriculture, manufacturing, and technology. China has also agreed to help Iran join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO. China is already Iran's biggest trading partner, trading over $15 billion of goods and services as of last year. But it is not just Iran in this region. China is also consciously cultivating Arab states like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. The 2022 China-Arab States Summit and the China Gulf Cooperation Council Summit, which was held last year in Riyadh, it was the result of a long process of reflection and diplomatic efforts of engagement between China and the Middle East. China outlined its policy towards the Arab world in a 2016 policy paper. This paper basically outlined China's plans to develop relationships with key Middle Eastern states. Beijing now sees the current regional context in the Middle East as favorable to it. Former colonial powers are in the midst of an economic crisis, whether it is the United States, whether it is its European partners in the UK and France. Moscow, of course, is busy with its war in Europe. Chinese experts believe, and they are convinced, that the United States has entered a period of decline. They are now focused on an eventual US withdrawal from the Middle East, a scenario which think tanks in Washington discuss from time to time, and one that would be a real opportunity for China. Selecting Riyadh, for example, as the venue of last year's summit was not a trivial choice. Beijing has understood the special role of Saudi Arabia as the guardian of Islam's holy places. If only for symbolic reasons, it must transcend these political quarrels and crises. China's diaspora is already in place, particularly in the United Arab Emirates. There are more than 300,000 Chinese nationals there. There are 4,000 Chinese businesses that are registered. Small and medium-sized enterprises globally have weathered successive crises under COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, but the Gulf region is one of the few in the world that is seeing accelerated growth, and China is very much front and center of it. The Arab world is concerned about the specter of a new Cold War between China and the United States. And this is a Cold War where they fear two-way geopolitics is becoming almost like an obligatory choice between the East and the West, and smaller countries, whether in the Gulf or anywhere else around the world, do not have a choice but have to pick a side. None of them have forgotten that the former Soviet Union, for example, at the height of the then Cold War, abandoned its supposed Arab brothers when the Berlin Wall fell. As for America's interventions, they have brought down dictators from Saddam Hussein to Muammar Gaddafi, but they have left behind unresolved and perhaps even unresolvable civil wars in the region. Riyadh is prepared to make strong gestures even if it's not well received in Washington. The Sino-Saudi oil agreements that were signed in November were denominated in yuan, the Chinese currency, not in American dollars. For its part, Qatar, which is a traditional ally of Washington, has just concluded a $60 billion LNG deal with China. The relationship between US President Joe Biden and Saudi Arabia's ruler, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, has been strained because of a number of issues, not least the murder of former journalist Jamal Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Biden had publicly rebuked MBS during his last trip to Saudi Arabia. There have been disagreements over energy prices as well. The Biden administration is taking steps to move away from fossil fuels, and that, of course, is burning a huge hole in Saudi Arabia's pocket, which relies heavily on oil exports. The US has even suspected, and said so publicly, that Riyadh is hand in glove with Moscow in OPEC Plus and deliberately keeping the price of oil high. But if today the United States finds itself having to deal with China at every turn in the Middle East, it only has itself to blame. The US pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal in 2018 created an opportunity for China to cement its ties not just with Tehran, but also gain a foothold in the region. China, which is the largest trading partner in this region, also saw this as an opportunity to expand not just its economic ties, but also an opportunity to expand its strategic influence in the wider Middle East. As the US withdraw from that region, China saw this as an opportunity to fill the void. Having lost Africa to China, America is now forced to fight the dragon for control of turf in another region of the world.